The wind cut through the jagged cliffs of Theraxis Prime, carrying ash and frost across the sky. Explosions echoed in the distance as two massive ships exchanged fire above the frozen valley. On the ground, soldiers of different species scattered through the snow, slipping between rocks and burned-out machinery. Among the chaos, a young human soldier named Kale spotted something that made him stop cold. There was a child barely more than 6 years old standing alone between two burning pods. Her silver hair whipped in the storm, and her eyes were glowing faint blue. She wasn't human. Her ears were too sharp. Her skin too pale. Her tail flicked once in fear, then curled around her legs. She didn't cry. She just stared up at him, frozen in place. Kale dropped his rifle and rushed forward. Plasma bolts scorched the snow behind him as enemy drones noticed his movement. He didn't care. He wrapped his arms around the girl and shielded her body with his own as one of the drones exploded just meters away. When the smoke cleared, Kale was limping and his armor was scorched. But he held the girl tightly in his arms. She looked up at him and whispered a single word in a broken voice. "Why?" Kale smiled gently, even though his lip was bleeding. "Because I don't leave kids behind," he answered without thinking. He didn't know she was a princess. He didn't know saving her would change the course of two empires. All he knew was that she was cold, scared, and alone. So he carried her to safety, step by step, through blood and ice. That was 10 years ago. The galaxy had changed since then. Kale had become a war hero. He had retired to a quiet outpost, away from politics and power. But whispers always followed him. Whispers of the silver-haired girl who had never forgotten the human who saved her. Now, deep in the frozen Deathworld arena of Zarni 7, Kale stood again, older, scarred, and tired. Before him stood a warrior clad in radiant armor, blades glowing. Blue in each hand, her silver hair now reached her waist. Her eyes were sharp with purpose. She was no longer a child. She was a blade forged by years of training. She didn't hesitate. She dashed forward with blinding speed, her twin swords slicing toward him. Kale blocked with his own red blade, sparks flying between them. She grinned as their weapons clashed, her voice filled with challenge. "You've grown slow, old man," she said with a smirk. Kale grunted, twisting to parry her second strike. "And you've grown dangerous," he replied, locking blades with her again. Every move she made was precise. She didn't hold back. Her strikes carried the weight of 100 battles. But Kale could still read her. He could see the small hesitation in her wrist, the emotion buried beneath her fury. She wasn't fighting to kill. She was fighting to test him. Around them, a crowd of elites watched from the frozen stands. Alien nobles, warriors, and scholars. They had gathered to witness this duel. The ancient rite of final testing. No words were spoken. No rules existed. Only one could rise from the arena as victor. Kale's muscles burned with each swing. His armor was heavier than hers. His reflexes slower. But he had experience, and something she didn't, memories. Memories of carrying her through fire. Teaching her how to hold a blade. Sharing food in a lonely bunker while the war burned outside. She struck again, and this time her blade scratched his cheek. He stepped back, breathing hard, but didn't falter. "You're not the same little girl who clung to my arm," he said, voice low. "And you're not the same man who gave me your coat," she answered, sadness flickering behind her glare. Their swords clashed again, red and blue dancing across the snow. The past and present collided in every strike. This wasn't just a fight, it was something deeper. A bond being tested under fire. Neither of them wanted to lose. But neither of them truly wanted to win either. Kale tightened his grip, knowing this was only the beginning. Kale moved in a slow circle, his boots crunching into the frozen ground. The Deathworld arena beneath them was wide and cracked, covered in patches of black ice and jagged frost. Wind screamed above the canyon walls while the crowd watched in perfect silence. The air was cold, but Kale's skin burned from each breath. Came at him again, both blades spinning like streaks of light. Kale ducked the first and blocked the second, sparks flying as metal scraped against energy. His arms shook from the force of the impact. She was faster now, stronger. Every strike tested his balance. He countered with a low sweep, forcing her to jump back. Her long white hair floated behind her like a banner. Her tail flicked once, steadying her landing. She did not blink. Her glowing eyes locked on him, full of fury and fire. Kale adjusted his stance and smiled. "You're holding back," he said. Raising his red blade, she tilted her head slightly. "So are you," she replied. They clashed again. This time their blades screamed together, red against blue, a storm of energy where they met. The ground cracked beneath their feet. She spun to his side and slashed at his ribs. He barely twisted in time, the edge grazing his armor and leaving. A glowing line. Kale stumbled back and raised his sword. His breath came faster now. The years had left marks on him. Scars on his back, a limp in his left leg. But his heart still burned with the same fire as the day he carried her from the flames. "I trained you better than this," he growled, stepping forward again. "You trained me to survive," she answered, parrying his strike. "Now I train to win." The words hit harder than her blades. Kale didn't respond. He pressed the attack. Their weapons danced in the air, throwing flashes of red and blue across the ice. She dodged, pivoted, and returned with a brutal double. Strike that pushed him to his knees. She didn't stop. She aimed her blade at his throat, the tip humming just inches away. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. For a moment, her hand trembled. Kale stared up at her. His voice was calm. "You think this is what you came here for?" She didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around the hilt. Her lips pressed into a line. Then she stepped back. The crowd gasped as one. Whispers rippled through the alien stands. This duel was supposed to end in death. That was the tradition. That was the law. The loser falls. The winner rises, but she had stepped away. She had chosen mercy. Kale stood slowly. His knees ached, and his ribs throbbed. But he straightened his back and faced her fully. "You're better than them," he said quietly. Her blue blade dimmed as she lowered it. "Then why do I feel like I've lost?" "Because you're still carrying the past," he said. "And so am I." She looked away for the first time. Her tail curled low. The fire in her eyes softened, just a little. For a moment, the Deathworld seemed quiet. No blades, no war. Just two souls caught in a storm they didn't create. "You think we can leave this place?" she asked. "I think we already did," Kale answered. Above them, the sky began to clear. A break in the clouds revealed a pale sun. Snowflakes danced in the light, drifting gently across their armor. Neither of them moved. The crowd was still watching, confused, angry, silent. The announcers did not speak. No horns were blown. No victory was declared, but something had ended in that arena. Not the duel, but the war inside both of them. She walked toward him and reached out her hand. He looked at it for a moment, then took it without hesitation. In that moment, the weapons didn't matter. The arena didn't matter. Only the bond that had survived 10 years of silence, betrayal, and war. They stood together, side by side, in front of the galaxy that expected only blood. Kale looked up at the judges in the stands and said one clear sentence: "This duel is over." The silence in the arena stretched as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Kale and the silver-haired warrior stood unmoving at the center, their hands still locked from the moment she had offered mercy. Around them, the alien audience murmured in confusion, some rising from their seats in disbelief. The traditions of the Deathworld duel had been broken, and no one knew what came next. High above, in a crystal tower of glass and ice, the Empress of Vorthari Prime rose from her throne. Her face was hidden behind a veil of shimmering blue light, but her voice carried clearly through the loudspeakers that lined the cliffs. "This duel is incomplete," she said. "There must be a victor." The warrior girl turned her eyes toward the tower, her voice firm. "I made my choice. I will not kill him." Kale looked up too, squinting through the snow and light. He could feel every gaze on them. The cold no longer mattered. The rules of the fight no longer mattered. What mattered was what this meant for her. She had broken a law. Not with words, but with honor. One of the armored guards at the edge of the arena stepped forward and raised his weapon. The crowd gasped again. The duel had not ended by their standards. Interference was now allowed. The guard aimed at Kale, the red beam charging at the tip of his rifle. Before Kale could react, she moved. Her blue sword flashed in a streak of light and tore through the air. The rifle dropped, sliced cleanly in half, and the guard fell back in shock. Her eyes burned like fire as she stood between Kale and danger. "No one touches him," she growled. The crowd roared in chaos. Some shouted for punishment. Others cheered at her defiance. But all eyes now saw her not as a girl, not even as a warrior. She was a force of will. And she had chosen the human over the crown. Kale stepped beside her, his voice low. "You just declared war on your own blood." She didn't flinch. "I made peace with the one who saved me." In the stands, diplomats and generals began to argue. Their voices crackled over comms and screens. Every planet with a stake in the duel now had to choose sides. Would they honor the tradition, or follow the heart of a warrior who had refused to kill? From the left cliff wall, a shuttle descended. It bore the black crest of the Judge's Order, an ancient council that governed sacred trials. The ship landed in silence, and 3 beings in long cloaks stepped out. One of them raised his hand and spoke. "This match is resolved. No blood need be spilled." The true test was never death. It was conviction. Gasps rippled again through the audience. The Empress said nothing. She turned and vanished into the shadows behind her throne. The tower lights faded, and the storm above the cliffs began to quiet. Kale felt the pressure ease from his chest. He turned to the girl beside him. "What now?" She looked around the arena, then back at him. Her voice was calm but determined. "Now we leave." Together, they moved through the cracked ice and rising steam. The path out of the arena was long, but no one stood in their way. Some bowed their heads as they passed. Others turned their faces in shame. She walked with her head high, and Kale followed with quiet pride. At the edge of the field, a young alien child reached out through the barrier. The girl paused and knelt beside her. "Never forget," she said softly. "Your heart is stronger than any sword." The child nodded, her wide eyes filled with wonder. Kale watched as the moment passed between them. The future was watching, and it was learning something new. Outside the arena, a transport waited for them. It was old and scarred, like Kale himself. He climbed aboard and sat by the window. She followed and stood by the door, looking back once more at the frozen battlefield they were leaving behind. Her fingers traced the edge of the blue blade before she finally sheathed it. As the engines rumbled and the ship rose into the sky, Kale leaned back and closed his eyes. "You've changed, kid." She sat beside him and smiled. "So did you, old man." The stars stretched across the dark sky like silver roads, and for the first time in years, Kale felt like he was finally headed home. Asterisk flew low over the icy plains, its engines humming softly against the silence outside. Inside, Kale sat by the window, staring at the white blur beneath them. His body ached from the duel, but the pain no longer mattered. What stayed with him was the way she had stood in front of that rifle, not as a student, not as a child, but as an equal. She stood near the cockpit, arms folded, eyes focused on the distance. Her mind wasn't resting. Every twitch of her tail, every sharp breath showed the storm still inside her. She had defied a galaxy, broken a law older than either of them. And she knew it wasn't over. Kale finally spoke. "You've started something that won't just disappear." She nodded without turning. "Then we'll face it." They landed on the outskirts of a neutral system known as Vessera's Hollow. It was a city built into the rock, shielded from the weather and the politics. Smugglers, traders, exiles, and forgotten warriors all gathered here. If there was a place to disappear, this was it. As they stepped off the ramp, eyes followed them. Her silver hair and regal posture made her impossible to hide. Kale noticed how many people bowed without even realizing it. The symbol of royalty was not so easily shed. They found an old bunker carved into the cliffs. Dust coated the walls, but the heat still worked. Kale checked the perimeter while she cleaned her swords and set up a small beacon. Neither of them spoke much, but there was comfort in the quiet. Later that night, she sat beside a small fire, her gaze lost in the flickering light. Kale tossed a ration pack onto the table and sat across from her. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't," she replied. "I keep hearing the crowd. The way they looked at us. Like we broke their universe." Kale gave a short laugh. "Maybe we did." She looked up, her eyes serious. "Do you regret saving me?" The question caught him off guard. He leaned forward and shook his head. "Never, even though everything changed after that day." She asked, "Because everything changed after that day," he answered. They fell into silence again. The wind outside howled against the bunker walls. Kale stared at the fire and thought of all the years between now and then. The times he wondered what became of the girl he'd carried through fire. Now she sat before him, stronger than any warrior he'd known. She finally spoke again. "They'll come for us. Assassins, hunters, even my own blood." Kale didn't flinch. "Then let them try." In the morning, a message came through the beacon, a simple pulse. One Kale recognized from his military days. It was a coded request for meeting, sent by someone using an old Earth Alliance signature. She read it too, and nodded once. "It's a trap," Kale agreed. "But it might be our only chance to understand who still sees us as friends." They geared up. She wore light armor, fast and flexible. Kale chose his old reinforced gear, scratched and dented from years of battle. They left the bunker behind, stepping into a narrow canyon that led toward the source of the signal. At the meeting point, 3 figures waited. One was human. The others were from the Shara Syndicate, a neutral faction known for information trading. The human stepped forward and removed his helmet. His face was older, tired, but familiar. "Captain Loran," Kale said with a nod. Loran nodded back. "Didn't expect you to walk out of that arena." "I didn't expect her to spare me," Kale replied, glancing at the girl beside him. Loran studied her carefully. "You understand the storm you started?" "I understand what I won't allow anymore," she said firmly. Loran looked at Kale. "We want to help. But we need something first, the truth." Kale's jaw tightened. "You'll get it. But not here." They moved the meeting to a deeper cave, far from drones and eyes. Kale began telling the story. Not the official version, the real one. The rescue, the hiding, the fear, the choice to never return her for a reward. The Shara Syndicate listened in silence. They recorded everything. When it was over, the lead agent nodded. "This will change things." She placed her hand on Kale's shoulder, then let it begin. The days that followed were tense and silent. Kale and the silver-haired warrior kept moving between outposts and forgotten tunnels beneath the canyon system. News had spread fast. The Deathworld duel had been seen across hundreds of systems, and the story had already begun to twist in the mouths of others. Some called it betrayal. Others called it a miracle. But all agreed on one thing: The girl who had once been a royal symbol was no longer bound to her bloodline. She had stepped out of the cage, and now the galaxy didn't know what to do with her. Kale watched her from across a narrow fire-lit chamber. She was sharpening her blade again, a habit she had never lost. The motion was smooth, automatic, like she wasn't even aware she was doing it. But her eyes told another story. They were watching the flames as if searching for answers inside them. He leaned against the wall and cleared his throat. "You always do that when you're nervous." She glanced at him, but didn't stop moving the blade. "I'm not nervous." "Just ready, for what?" he asked. "For everything they're about to throw at us," she answered. Before he could respond, a distant explosion rumbled through the cave. Dust fell from the ceiling. They both jumped to their feet. Kale grabbed his weapon, and she was already sprinting toward the outer tunnel. Outside, the sky was filled with smoke. A fleet of small black drones swarmed the entrance of the canyon, their red sensors glowing as they scanned the area. Kale raised his rifle and fired a burst, taking out 2. She leapt forward, slicing 3 more before they could even react. The attack was fast and silent. Whoever had sent them didn't want to make a statement. They wanted to erase them. After clearing the drones, Kale checked the wreckage. No markings. No serial numbers. Clean tech, mercenary grade. "They're not from your mother," he muttered. "No," she said, wiping her blade. "They're from someone worse." They retreated back inside and activated the emergency shields. The cave glowed with a thin blue light as the barrier sealed the entrance. Kale paced while she checked the beacon for traces of signal interference. "I knew we were being watched," she said quietly. Kale looked at her and narrowed his eyes. "You think it's Lauren?" "No, he wouldn't use drones. He prefers human eyes." Kale ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "Then someone else has decided we're a threat." She turned to him and walked closer. "That means we're getting closer to the truth." They stayed underground for another day. During that time, Kale reviewed the files they had recovered from the Shara Syndicate. Hidden deep inside the data logs were transcripts, old communication records between officials from her empire and representatives of unknown systems. One file stood out. It was a directive labeled simply, Operation Emberlight. Its language was vague, but the purpose was clear. The girl was never supposed to return. She was meant to be erased. Kale looked up from the screen. "They planned this. They planned to let you die on Theraxis Prime. That's why there was no search." She stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. "They abandoned me. They used you," he said. "But you survived. That's why they fear you now." She didn't respond. She walked to the wall and stared at the glowing shield. Her reflection stared back at her, blurred and pale. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice came low. "I won't run anymore." Kale stepped beside her. "Then we strike first." They left the cave that night and headed toward the nearest comms tower. It was guarded by an old war clan. Neutral but willing to deal for the right cause. Kale bartered access in exchange for weapons and supplies. When the leader of the clan asked who the girl was, Kale only said one word: change. Inside the tower, she began broadcasting the files, one by one, every secret, every betrayal, every order to let a child die. She didn't speak during the transmission. She just stared at the screen while the galaxy listened. Kale watched her with pride. Let them hear it. Let them see what they tried to bury. When the message ended, she finally looked at him and whispered just one sentence. "We fight on our terms now." Asterisk. The broadcast spread faster than Kale expected. Within hours, a dozen independent channels had copied the files and pushed them to every corner of the system. Screens across space stations, marketplaces, and warships lit up with her image. A silver-haired warrior standing beside a human, revealing the truth the Empire tried to bury. Some called her a traitor. Others called her a symbol. But what mattered now was that she was no longer hidden. She had spoken. She had exposed the lie. And now the galaxy had to choose whether to silence her or stand with her. Kale checked the tower's defenses. Energy shields were holding for now, but they wouldn't last against a full assault. The war clans nearby were watching, and though they had offered supplies, none had promised loyalty. Trust was currency, and they had very little to spend. She was sitting alone on the roof of the tower, legs crossed, blades laid out beside her. The wind pulled her silver hair around her shoulders, and her eyes were locked on the stars. Kale climbed the metal steps and sat beside her without saying a word. For a while they didn't speak. The sky was too quiet. The kind of quiet that always came before something terrible. "Do you regret it?" Kale finally asked. "No," she said simply. "Even if it brings another war? I'd rather live hated than die as their puppet." Kale nodded. He understood. He had made the same choice long ago, though not as loudly. She had done it with a sword and a voice. He had done it with silence and survival. A soft beep echoed from Kale's wristband. He tapped the display. A message blinked onto the screen. It was short and unsigned, but the coordinates were clear. Someone was coming, someone big. He showed her the data. She stood quickly and gathered her weapons. "They're sending a fleet. We need to move. We can't outrun ships," Kale said. "No, but we can change the field." They left the tower before the morning sun touched the horizon. Traveling by foot, they crossed the old mining plains of Vexera's southern edge. The ground here was unstable, marked by collapsed tunnels and magnetic storms. Dangerous for vehicles. Deadly for ships. "This place is a graveyard," Kale muttered. "Perfect for hiding ghosts." She replied. They found an abandoned base buried under the rock. It still had partial power and enough shielding to hide their signal. Inside were crates of forgotten weapons and half-functioning drones. Kale smiled as he opened one of the boxes. "Looks like someone left us a gift." They spent the next few hours setting traps. Old war tricks, redirected signals, false beacons. Automated turrets that would trigger at the first drop of enemy. Boots. It wasn't a fortress, but it was a message. If they were going to be hunted, they would not be easy prey. As they worked, Kale noticed something different in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even rage. It was purpose. She was no longer running. She was preparing. He stopped for a moment and watched her finish setting a tripwire. "You've changed more than you realize." She didn't look up. "I became what they tried to destroy." By evening, the sensors picked up movement. A dropship entered the atmosphere, followed by 3 scout crafts. They were fast, silent, and clearly military. Kale adjusted the drone cameras and watched them land 2 kilometers away. She checked her blade and nodded. "They'll come soon." Kale loaded his rifle and stood beside her. "Then let's greet them properly." As night fell, the first scout team entered the canyon. They moved with precision, weapons raised, scanning the terrain. One stepped on a pressure plate and vanished in a flash of plasma. The others scattered, but more traps followed. From their position above the ridge, Kale and the warrior watched as the invaders stumbled into chaos. One by one, the traps and decoys shredded their formation. The remaining soldiers fell back toward the ship, dragging the wounded behind them. "They weren't ready for us," Kale said. "No one ever is," she replied. The battle had not been won with strength, but with strategy. And it was only the beginning. They knew more would come. Bigger forces, heavier guns. But with each attack, the message grew stronger. They were no longer victims. They were resistance. The next morning brought a sky heavy with smoke. Fires from the destroyed dropship still burned in the distant canyon. Kale stood on the ridge, watching the dark columns rise and twist against the wind. The wreckage was a warning to whoever was watching. Below him, the warrior moved through the base with focus. She was repairing damaged drones, resetting trap lines, and upgrading the beacon. Every motion was sharp and fast. She moved like someone who no longer doubted her purpose. Kale stepped down to join her. They'll send more. That was just the first wave. I hope they do, she answered without hesitation. They reviewed the camera footage of the ambush. The soldiers were the crest of the House of Viren, an ancient noble line sworn to her mother. They were elite. Trained to kill. Sent not to capture, but to erase. They still believe fear will work, Kale said, shutting off the screen. They were wrong then. They're wrong now, she replied. She checked the long-range scanners. A small fleet had entered orbit. It wasn't official. No flags, no transmissions. A ghost fleet. Hidden and silent. Waiting for the right moment to strike. They're preparing something bigger. Kale said. They know we've become a symbol, she said. They want to end that before it spreads. He leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. Then, we make it spread faster. They activated a hidden uplink inside the bunker. It tapped into forgotten networks used during the old wars. The signal was weak but wide, enough to reach outer systems, enough to call allies and warn others. Kale's voice was the first thing the network heard. Not a soldier, not a leader, just a man telling the truth. He spoke of the war, the rescue, the betrayal, the duel, and the fire that came after. Then she stepped in front of the camera, her voice calm, her eyes clear. She didn't beg. She didn't demand. She simply declared the truth, that she had survived not because of blood, but because of choice, that the Empire lied, that she had chosen a different path. Systems responded, not many at first, but a few. Fringe colonies sent messages. A mining guild offered fuel. A wandering fleet promised passage. A merchant family pledged protection for any children displaced by war. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. As night fell again, Kale sharpened his blade while watching the stars. The warrior joined him, her own swords resting nearby. The silence between them was peaceful now, not heavy, not broken, just quiet and strong. You ever wonder what happens after all this? Kale asked. Sometimes, she said. But not as much as I used to. What do you see? I see peace. Not everywhere. But maybe enough. Kale smiled faintly and nodded. Enough is worth fighting for. An alert blinked on the console inside the cave. A transmission was trying to break through. Not from space, but from the surface. Someone was approaching. With a live signal, not encrypted, not masked. Kale tapped the console. A voice came through. Calm, steady, familiar. This is Lauren. I'm coming alone. I need to speak with both of you. No weapons. No lies. Kale glanced at her. She gave a small nod. Let him come. Lauren arrived just before dawn. He walked. With slow steps, hands raised. His armor was scratched. His face was lined with exhaustion. But his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had survived too many wars. Inside the bunker, they sat at the table. No threats, no shouting. Just silence and then words. I came to tell you something, Lauren began. The Empress is dying. Neither of them spoke. She's lost control. The nobles are turning on each other. They see you as either a weapon or a threat. Some want to crown you. Others want to kill you. But all agree on one thing. You've changed the board. Kale leaned forward. Why are you here? Lauren's voice dropped. Because I don't want another war. I want to help you finish what you started. And because I owe you. She looked him in the eyes. Then we need one thing first. What's that? He asked. She stood slowly and picked up her blades. Proof. Asterisk. The word proof echoed in the silence of the bunker. Lauren didn't move. His eyes flicked to the swords in her hands, then back to her face. There was no threat in her stance, only resolve. She wasn't asking for blood. She was demanding clarity. Kale stood beside her, arms crossed. His presence alone was steadying. For years he had watched the galaxy twist the truth. Now he stood with someone who wanted to untwist it, blade by blade. Lauren took a slow breath. What kind of proof? The location of the chamber, she said. The one where the orders were signed, the original directive. I want the logs. I want the signatures. I want the faces of everyone who wanted me dead. Lauren nodded slowly. There's a vault beneath the core of the capital. Hidden beneath the Hall of Unity. Only 3 people have access. The Empress is one of them. Then we go there, Kale said. Lauren didn't argue. I'll get you in. But if we're seen, no one will hesitate to strike. That place is sacred. Breaking into it is suicide. Only if we fail, she replied. They left that night. A smuggler ship provided by Lauren carried them through unmarked space. They flew through the shadows of black dwarf stars and unpatrolled lanes, never staying still for more than a few hours. The closer they got to the capital, the more dangerous it became. The city was a fortress carved into the bones of a mountain. Its towers reached into the clouds, and its foundations sank into lava-heated depths. The Hall of Unity stood in the center, glowing gold under the watch of hundreds of guards. They entered disguised as workers during the morning shift. Lauren led them through old maintenance routes, ducts, and storage shafts. Kale moved with the ease of an old soldier. She moved like a shadow, silent and swift. When they reached the inner chamber, a giant door blocked the way. It was sealed by genetic code and bloodline. Lauren stepped forward and placed his hand on the panel. It scanned his blood and opened without a sound. Inside was silence, no guards, no alarms. Just a long hall lined with scrolls, tablets, and records. It was the kind of place history tried to forget. The kind of place built to bury truths. She walked slowly down the aisle, scanning every row. Then she stopped. Her hand hovered over a black scroll sealed in crystal. Kale watched as her fingers tapped the glass. It glowed in recognition of her. DNA. The seal broke with a hiss. The scroll unfolded in the air, showing the names of the council who ordered her abandonment. Signatures, faces, timelines, it was all there. Kale stared at the list. Some names he recognized, others were ghosts. But they all had one thing in common. They had chosen silence. They had chosen to erase her. She downloaded the records into a secure drive. Her voice didn't shake. This is all we need. Footsteps echoed behind them. The Empress entered, flanked by 2 guards. Her face was thinner than the last time they had seen her. Her crown looked heavier than before. Her voice came cold and tired. I always knew this day would come. She dismissed her guards with a wave. They hesitated, but obeyed. The Empress stepped forward alone and looked at her daughter. You survived. I did, the warrior said. And now what? The Empress asked. Now the galaxy hears your lies, she said. The Empress did not deny it. She simply nodded. Then go. You've already won. They didn't attack. There was no battle. No screaming. Just a mother letting go of a power she no longer had. Kale and the warrior left the chamber in silence. Lauren stayed behind, watching the last pieces of an old empire begin to fall. Back on their ship, she uploaded the proof to the same network that once carried her message. The files spread in seconds. Worlds reacted. Protests began. Laws collapsed. Leaders were replaced. The galaxy shifted. Kale sat in the cockpit, watching the stars. She joined him quietly and sat beside him. Her swords were finally sheathed. Her voice was soft. It's over. Kale looked at her and gave a tired smile. Not over. Just changed. She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closed, listening to the hum of the ship. Thank you, she whispered. Always, he answered. They flew toward a future neither of them could predict. But they flew free,